Development Officer for the UNICEF Belize. He has taught, written, and presented on topics including the decolonization of education and development. He's currently research director at Benque University. Welcome, Dr. Penados.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. So it's half an hour, right? Correct? All right, so my theme this afternoon is on Indigenous future making, the challenge of reimagining and recrafting our relationship with the land and each other, and sort of like what I've heard. I've worked a lot with Indigenous communities in Belize and also in the region around the theme of Indigenous education, Indigenous development. So this is something that is quite close to my heart. So I wanted to start by sharing some slides there, if you can see them on the upper left corner. Yes, I think that is. So that's a slide that's showing what's happening with this there today, where we are right now, and what might be the various possible paths going forward, with kind of very high emissions. For example, that's kind of what you'll have at the very top, and the kind of at the very low you have, if we really do whatever it is that we need to do to curb the rise of temperatures in the world. So essentially what I'm saying is we're confronted with a major challenge of climate change. You know, it may seem that it's unreal, we don't see it every day, we don't feel it, but it's a real thing. And if we sit down and think of it, I mean, it is really a threat to the whole planet, to whole humanity. It is a threat to our future, okay? And there are many people who say actually that the time for preventing it has already gone by, okay? We cannot do anything about it. That what lies ahead is actually adaptation. What might we do to adapt to this current, to this reality that confronts us? Below there's another graph. It's kind of hard to see perhaps, but you see a graph there that is showing you the carbon emissions and how essentially the issue of climate change is connected to human beings. So it's anthropocentric. There's been a lot of debate about whether actually it's human beings that cause it and so on and so forth. So people say, you know, climate change is unreal. But most scientists agree that there's no doubt that it is anthropocentric. So if you see kind of the last bit of that chart, basically showing you the rise in carbon emissions, which is connected to climate change since the 1940s or so on. Okay, so essentially, look, especially with the Industrial Revolution, you see a lot of this happening. So climate change is a major threat. I started to read a book from a colleague that's called Climate Leviathan and Joel Wainwright. And, you know, they point out that it's not in the world. And it's going to change how we govern ourselves, organize ourselves. There's no doubt that things will have to change. And that is real. And of course, the impact of climate change, everybody, you know, you hear a lot about it in the news. Obviously, that circle there, the diagram there shows you a number of the challenges. Hunger, increased migration, oceans warming up, people being displaced both internally and internationally. So these are some of the challenges that we think the way that we relate with the land and with each other. So I'll have the next slide. Poverty and COVID here. This is some charts showing kind of what's happening with poverty. So according to the World Bank, poverty has been going down, and those are the various, on the left-hand side, you'll see the various kind of lines tracking the trend of poverty in different parts of the world, East Asia and so on, Latin America. But there's sort of a tendency of on the right hand, however, you see another slide which shows you what happened at the moment that COVID hit. And so you see the red line going down is kind of the direction in which poverty was going. And from that point, it says 8.4, you see poverty actually, the chart completely changes the direction. So poverty has increased as a result of COVID. My point is that in a sense, COVID has come around and has shown a light on the inequality, on the poverty, on the challenges created by COVID. It simply came and showed us what is going on. It made us see that, okay? I'll have the next slide. Interestingly, the title of this report, which comes from the World Bank, it says, reversals of fortune. So it's saying, okay, poverty was going down, right? And suddenly COVID came and it started going up. But if you see the chart in the center there, it's showing you the wealth growing across us. And COVID has actually increased their wealth. So it's a world kind of extremes, you know, it doesn't make sense. So you have increased poverty now for people, but certain people have made lots of money, a tremendous amount of money as a result of COVID. So the world seems to be, you know, it's faced with huge challenges, both socially, environmentally, economically, that it caused then for us to rethink as to how we relate with the land. So we have that challenge. And so what I wanted to share with you here is a little bit of what Indigenous peoples are engaged in. I argue that Indigenous peoples have been engaging this challenge of imagining and enacting alternative futures. It's something that I call Indigenous future making. And that's around the world. Of course, most of you will be familiar with 1994, with struggle against kind of the new policies being implemented in Mexico, the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement that was threatening to impact communities in Chiapas. And they've tried to invent a different society, not even taking over the state, but really just within their lands, trying to figure out how they can build different relationships with each other, a struggle for dignity, as they call it, okay? In South America, similar thing. There are a number of movements, a number of proposals, and Indigenous scholars and leaders. On the right-hand side, I have a slide there that says, diagram there that says Summa Causai, which is translated roughly as buen vivir, or good living, or good life. And it's a proposal, a way of thinking about the future that is emerging from Aymaras and Quechua in South America. And this Red Pluriversitaria is a network of people who are trying to figure out how do we engage with our land, how is going to be dignity for everybody in a way that will have well-being for everybody, in a way that we can think about well-being in a non-mainstream sort of way. Here in Belize, you have kind of similar struggles. And in the center there, I have a slide, a picture of, this picture was taken in, I think, 2008 or 2010, after the Maya people in southern Belize won their first case in the court affirming their rights to land. So Maya people down have been engaged in a struggle to affirm their rights to land. And they say, look, it's not about land as real estate. Really, it is about our way of being, our living on the land, our living well on the land. And so if you see there, it talks about equal dignity, it talks about sovereignty, self-determination, it talks about dignity and equality and stuff like that. So they're struggling to affirm those rights, but well on the land, okay? And so most of all might be familiar with what is going on there because it's often in the news. In 2015, they finally obtained a court ruling at the highest court of Belize, the Caribbean Court of Justice, that says, yes, Maya people have their rights to land, communally owned lands. So they're owned as a community, so it departs from the conventional way of owning land as private property, individualized. So that's probably something that we might be familiar with because it's been a lot on the news. On the far right side, I have another picture. So in 2018, the Maya people in southern Belize engaged in a process to imagine a future for themselves. So the leadership thought that it was important to engage young people, women, men, to interpret their reality, to take account of where they are, and to think, what is it that we envision for our future? So those two things I've described going on in Toledo are, in my view, efforts at creating an imagine. So I was engaged in this, and this is kind of what I want to share. I was engaged with those communities in a process of thinking about this alternative future. And it was a very simple process. We asked 3 questions. Who are we? How are we? And what is our dream for the future of our communities and our land? And in order to do this, to create an alternative space for thinking, okay, with this, instead of having people talk about what it is that they want and how they see themselves, we asked them to draw these things out, okay? So it shifted them from the usual kind of question, which is, what is it you need? Or what is wrong with your community? Drawing, engages you in a different way with the material. So we use drawing, and so you see there an example of young women drawing how they see themselves. So I want to share with you some of those diagrams and then kind of draw some of the things that I think we can learn from that. So we'll have the next slide. Unfortunately. But here are 2 drawings, one done by women and the next done by men. On the right, on the left-hand side, you have a drawing made by women. And I said, unfortunately, you cannot see it. I mean, the light is a little bit too much light there. But okay, if we go to the kind of lower left-hand corner, you will see there's a woman that is washing in the river, okay? A little bit higher above, you see a woman holding something in her hands. Then you see, for example, on the far across on the right corner, you see a woman with something like a rake or a machete, and she's tending a garden. And you see the garden has plantains, corn, all kinds of things growing. Behind that woman, just a little bit above that woman, there are some chickens. There's a big chicken coop that is almost the size of the house where people live, okay? And you will see also in front of the house, you cannot see it very well, but there's a woman that's doing embroidery or inside the house. There's somebody lying in the hammock, and I always make this joke and I say, hopefully it's also a woman and not a man lying down in the hammock. The point here is that this communicates, this is what women do. One group of women says, this is who we are. And in a sense, it communicates a particular way of being on the land. Land is sustenance, land provides for you, and all of that. On the right-hand side, you have one done by men. And you see right in the center, there's a man with a hat and a machete, and he has a dog, and below it says witch, which is armadillo. So there's hunting that is happening, hunting for witch, for armadillo. You see a woman carrying water. You see some hills. Hills are very important in Mayan cosmology because they talk about the lords or the owner of the hills and the valleys as the caretakers, that everything in nature sort of belongs to that. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to us of this. And I have to ask permission. I have to express gratitude for everything that I'm receiving. At the very center is a cocoon palm. Again, it kind of dominates the drawing. And if you have been to Toledo, you know the importance of cocoon is used for building thatch houses. You can eat the nuts you can make oil out of it. You can make all kinds of things out of it, okay? There's an orchard to the right-hand side, and at the top, there's a monkey going. You cannot see it very well, but there's a monkey, bats, it says, swinging from trees to trees. So, being split. So the word that sort of captures that, and often people spoke about this, was Ral Church. Now, Ral Church means children of the earth. Children of the earth. But in a sense, it's about, Ral Church means we are children of the earth. We're people who depend, who live on, who take care of the land. So we have a relationship with the land, an integral relationship with the land, okay? Where it's children. And it's like we suck from Mother Earth breast, sort of thing, okay? It's kind of always spoken about. I'll have the next slide. Okay, so, what are our pains and joys? I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but identify things, for example, say, yeah, you know, we are communities that are internally divided, we quarrel among each other, but we also have unity. Politicians are a big challenge. Multiple churches are a big challenge. Foreign companies are a big challenge. Internal and external kind of pressures that are occurring there. We're aware of this, and also we have strengths, but we have weaknesses. These are our pains, and these are kind of our joys. I'll move on, because I want to show you what they dreamt. Go ahead. Okay. There must have been a mix-up there with the slides. Sorry. So this is still who we are. On the left corner, what you see there is people building a thatch house, symbolizing who they are. And thatch houses are built through a collective effort. You know, people come together and build the roof of the house using cocoon leaves. On the far right corner, you have one drawn by young people, and you see a thatch house, and there's a path that leads to the pyramid, to the Maya temple. So in a sense, we have a long history on this land, and you see a bowl of caldo, you see cacao, you see dresses hanging there. So they're talking about this is who we are, this is our identity, the land provides, the land is a beautiful place, the sun is shining. This is who we are. So some words that jumped out there was like Hunahil, Komonil, Komolbe, Benque. Hunahil, Komonil means like unity, oneness, community. Komolbe refers to leadership, he who leads along the path, as in very, very important. And the leadership as the eyes, ears, and mouth of the community. Not necessarily decision makers, but those who speak the voice of the community. And a Benque, which means to listen, but it's the word that is used for meeting. And the meeting of the community, Benque, I'm going to listen when they mean I'm going to the meeting. So it kind of changes the way that you think about what a meeting is. And in the center, there's another drawing there that they drew what we are not. And it's interesting because you see somebody dressed in the Belizean flag, a little thought bubble. And in there you have a person begging, a person lying on the ground, like emaciated, flies flying around, and a skinny dog, you know. So this is how we are seen, but this is not who we are. Everything else is showing you who we are. So what's the dream of the future? A couple of things. On the left-hand side, you'll see the hills and the mountains. Like a big feature there, again, this idea of the mountains and hills as being important to Mayan cosmology. But you also see like paved roads, you see the Maya temple, you see like what do we call it, a zip line. So the idea of making use of those resources, both cultural and natural, to build kind of an economy, but at the same time, you know, protects the forest. At the same time, on the right-hand side, I have a number of buildings there, and some of them say, actually, there's a sign at the very beginning, it says, "Welcome to Maya People's Land." And then it says, Maya School, Maya Bank, Maya Health Centers, everything is sort of stamped with that. The point there is that, you know, they imagine that being in control and sort of defining those institutions, redefining them, okay? But also incorporating kind of knowledge from multiple horizons. Let's go to the next slide. And I just want to highlight on the left one, right at the bottom, you see two people shaking hands. This is 2018. The party in power is the United Democratic Party. Their color is represented by red, okay? So you see two people shaking hands there. If you've been to Toledo and you've seen the leaders, you'll recognize who the next person is, because they have a costal, little bag that they always carry, okay? And so they're shaking hands. Between the state and Maya communities. Okay? So I wanted to highlight that. On the right-hand side, there's a drawing of, this says Happy Family Village. So there's a kitchen, sorry, there's a house, And in the house, the biggest room, of course, is the kitchen. That's where everything happens. And there's like a storage for food, not a fridge, but actually a whole room. You see a garden, you see again somebody relaxing, bathroom, but up there it says rent, and there's a little place inside the house. In one corner they have books, and the other one they have traditional medicine. So this kind of integration of different knowledge horizons into life. I'll have the next slide. All right, so what can we learn? One, I think that there's a critical pedagogy in this, okay? So there's a critical reading of the world. And I've seen this in my experience down in Toledo. People, the leadership and communities interested in understanding what's going on in the world at the surface, okay? So there's a critical reading of the world. And that's on the basis of that, of course, that they're constructing and engaging with the world. There's also a courage to dream and enact alternative worlds, kind of a radical hope. You think, and sometimes I think, if people have been under kind of oppression for 500 plus years because they're different and they speak a different language, it's like, wouldn't you just get on with the game and just give that up? But there's kind of a radical hope, okay? So there's that, and there's this courage to dream something that is different. There's also a kind of tenacious and sustained collective struggle that, it's a continuity. The land rights struggle, for example, that started in the last iteration of the land rights struggle. It started in the mid-1990s, culminated in 2015 with a Caribbean Court of Justice ruling. They still have to implement that, and the struggle carries on, but people still do not give up, okay? There's also a kind of rediscovering to concepts like Real Church, Kunakil, Komolbe, Benque, and many others. They're imagining new ways of being that are not necessarily how it used to be in the past, but also adapted for the future, for the present, and for the future. So there seems to be a process of rerouting and rerouting. And within this, two themes seem to come to mind. One is interculturality. This drawing there is was drawn by a woman, and it says, who with traditional dress? And you'd think like a cornmeal, Maya cornmeal? That doesn't make sense, right? Okay, maybe you should have done a metate, a grinding stone, but this is a mill. But in a sense, she's incorporated this new technology, re-signified it, and this is who I am. I'm not somebody from the past. I'm here in the present. In fact, I'm a future actor. I'm a future maker. So incorporating that, but also this pluriversality. And there's a concept that comes from the Zapatistas in which many worlds can fit. So a world where there can be different ways of knowing and being, and a space can be created for that. I'll have the next slide. So for me, here we're faced with education. If you think about it, it's about shaping the subjectivities of young people, shaping these agents that actually are future makers. How do we prepare these future makers? How do we prepare them to read the world? What kind of interpretive frameworks do we need to provide them? To me, I think it's one question that we need to answer. How do we open spaces for imagination? Or we should ask also, how do we limit those spaces for imagination? Okay? And how might we open new spaces? How do we develop the courage and tenacity among our young people? How do we develop the passion? The passion for thinking of the other, being able to see oneself in the other. How do we prepare them to deal with complexity and uncertainty? How do we make it pluriversality? How do we create possibilities for rerouting and rerouting? To me, that's kind of like some of the questions that we are faced with. There's a photograph there of an initiative that we started, I don't know, in the education that attempted to respond to some of this by putting the child in the center of the community, as you can see in that drawing, by incorporating local knowledges, by creating a space where people are okay, not telling them that they have to be this way, but opening a space where they can reroute and they can reroute. And in a sense, by also challenging what it means to do education. Like you see there, education is happening on, that's a graduation, but it's not happening in, some fancy building, it's happening on the ground. Okay? And in a sense, this education might seem like something simple, but it's also challenging the way that we think about Belize. Some of the key things that emerge from, some of the challenging things that emerge from indigenous movements are, for example, concepts as communal land rights. We're used to this idea of private land rights, okay? And so communities owning the land, it doesn't make sense in the system. Two, the states have monopoly on the exercise of power. They didn't want to share it. But here, govern ourselves and make decisions. We want to make a different relationship with you. And so in a sense, that model of education that we had there was asking questions such as, what counts as knowledge? Who knows? What counts as the knower? Who should govern education? What should be the curriculum? And some of these questions sort of informed what we were doing there. Can I take the next slide? I'll skip there. I think I repeated myself here. Go back. Sorry. Okay, so I wanted to end with two things. The last point there, words such as dignity, solidarity, interculturality, pluriversality definitely kind of emerge from the kind of work that I've been doing with indigenous communities. This is a complex thing, obviously, and I want to close with a story from a drawing from one of the women there. She drew this, and she drew this, and it drew a rectangle, and she has an arrow that says land, okay? And inside that land, she has some corn, some chicken, and she said, what we want is to eat caldo, okay? Caldo is a soup, so that didn't kind of make sense. So, well, you want to eat caldo? That's a dream. My dream for the future is to eat caldo. That's kind of what she said. And in a sense, we want our corn and our chicken so that we can have our tortillas and our caldo. That's what we want. But when you start looking at caldo, it has tremendous significance. When you first arrive at a home, what they will serve you is caldo, because it is the most important food. So in a sense, it communicates dignity. I can offer you something, but it also communicates generosity. Okay? Whenever it is that they are touching those houses, what is served is caldo. Okay? So often it symbolizes also reciprocity. It is what is used to celebrate in the community. So it's well-being. When women bear their children, the first thing that they serve after they have their child is a bowl of caldo, and people will come with chicken to gift to the women. So it also, this symbolizes well-being. But not all caldos are the same, okay? So when you prepare caldo, for example, for touching a roof, it has to be prepared in a certain way. The person who's preparing it has to approach it almost as a sacred task. They have to abstain from certain things, from eating certain things and sexual abstinence. Because if not, the roof won't last very long. Okay? The same thing with corn. If we don't, then you have to treat the corn in a certain way, because otherwise the corn won't bear much fruit. Okay? When you finish eating, you have to get rid of the bones and the remains in a particular sort of way. So it's approached kind of in a sacred way. Often we tend to think that this is kind of superstition. And sometimes we demonize those practices because of a lack of understanding, and sometimes, a lack of understanding and arrogance of assuming that we know. Beings are in this relationship with these other beings, that what I do affects the corn. What I do affects that. We're all living creatures. So in a sense, how do we make space for these different ways of knowing, different ways of being in education? To me, is one of the tasks that we have, and I think one important task for thinking and crafting our relationship with the land and each other. Thank you.